Come in the house. Come in the house. Jesus, you are welcome. Come in this house. Let your glory fill this house. Let your glory fill this house. Jesus, you are welcome. Let your glory fill this house. Let your love fill this house. Let your love fill this house. Jesus, you are welcome. Let your love fill the house. We're going to move into this next section, which was the 3 phases or 3 classes of humility. And again, I just keep laughing. I get like, I would have, and I chose this, which is funny. I think at the time I was like, well, the days that were offered, this was the day that worked for me. And so I think God already knew, like, yeah, I want you to figure this out because I'm just saying personally, I struggle with this. And I think a lot of us might struggle with this, especially if we're good Catholics. And we deal a lot with guilt or, that kind of situation. Like good spiritual people have trouble, I think, with really understanding what humility is. So I also love where it's placed in the exercises, because it's getting us, again, prepared to make some kind of decision. And so Ignatius is really wanting us to be in a space where we know ourselves really well. Again, it's not about judging. It's not about saying that we're failing or that we're not good enough, but it's like really know yourself, because you're getting ready to move into a space where you might be called to make some kind of change. And so you want to have all the information that you need to do that. So you're taking an objective look at where you are so that you can maybe answer where God is going to be calling us, right? So I think sometimes we need to remember that the exercise, at least for me anyway, the exercises, the goal is for us to know ourselves, to love how God works in us, to praise, reverence, or how all that fits together, and doing that in a way that is joy-filled and joyous. So what is humility and what is it not? And I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Isn't it amazing how things can change, meanings can change just with, where you put the words in the sentence. Like, for instance, I think about when we talk about John the Baptist, and sometimes, I hear sometimes it's a voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, right? The pause comes after in the wilderness, which implies that the voices, that there's someone standing in the wilderness and he or she screaming, prepare the way of the Lord. But if you put the comma in the right, you put the pause in another space, a voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. So now it's not the voice in the wilderness, but the voice saying, when you're in your wilderness, that's the time when you should prepare the way for the Lord, right? So again, thinking about where we place emphasis on words changes the meaning and makes it really come alive for us. So again, humility is not about thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. This is the way that my friend Francis de Sales said it. Now, Francis de Sales, as I said earlier, loved Ignatius. And I like to say that, Francis de Sales took the tenets of Ignatian spirituality and made it even more practical for lay people to understand. So if you're not familiar with Francis de Sales, and Salesian spirituality jump to it. But this is a wonderful rendering by Mickey McGrath of St. Francis de Sales and Ignatius of Loyola, kind of showing their friendship, even though they weren't they weren't alive at the same time, but just the connection, their heart, right? But he says this, Francis says, be who you are, and be that well. So be who you are, not who somebody else is, not, not trying to change, but be who God has made you to be. Now you got to discover that, sure, yeah. But be that well, because when you are who God made you to be, that gives honor to God. It doesn't give God honor for you to act or be or deny something that God placed in you. That doesn't give God honor. And I really had to struggle with this. So that I struggled with this a lot because I thought humility meant I just deny everything. Like, oh, I'm not good. Oh, no, don't say that. So when I have the hardest time saying thank you. Just thank you. When someone says something to me, if someone says that was really great. Oh, I immediately I want to say, oh, well, want to thank you is fine. Yes, you are gifted. You are talented. You have things. You are blessed with stuff. God looked at you and put all these amazing things in us and then said, I don't have to do that again because I put it in her, right? Every day that you breathe, your mission on earth is not completed, which means your gifts, your talents are needed for the kingdom. So we recognize that we're gifted. We recognize that we didn't, God put them in us. It's not like, oh, I did this myself. God works with me, but I can't do it myself. I receive these gifts from God. And when I stay connected to God is when I fully live out who God has made me to be. Again, we talk about this. Be who you are and be that well. In order to give honor to the master craftsman whose handiwork you are. I don't know if people, I'm going to stop here just for a second. I don't know if people have seen The Greatest Showman. If you've not seen that movie, I just, today would be a great day to watch it. But in the movie, one of the key songs in the movie is a song called This Is Me, where the bearded woman who, at the beginning, Hugh Jackman, as playing the circus trainer, kind of calls all these people who are like misfits and says, you're going to be known for your uniqueness. He like pumps them up for their uniqueness, right? And then as he starts, it's funny, it's like a Two Standards movie. He starts, he's on, this is great. I just thought of this. He's on the road, he's on the stand for Christ. He's looking for people who don't recognize their giftedness, who like on the surface might look like they don't look like everybody else. He's saying, no, you have talent, you have gift, you have all this awesomeness. And then he brings them together in the circus and highlights that. And then he starts to get recognized. He starts to get riches and honor, and he almost forgets. And then there's a pivotal scene where he's at a party with all these like people. And then the group that he's been nurturing comes and says, hey, we're ready to come to the party. And he literally slams the door in their face and says, no, you can't come in. And then she turns around and sings this amazing song, like, this is who I am. Like, I'm not going to let the world knock me down. This is who I am. I'm going to be who I am, right? There is a video on YouTube of Keala Settle practicing that song, where she talks about how even for her singing the song as a woman plus size, she was like, I just didn't believe this song was hard for me to sing. And that they were putting this song, like I'm carrying the weight of the song for this movie. And they show her as she sings the song in practice, how she begins to really embrace what she's saying. It's like humility, authentic humility being laid out. She starts really shy and no, that's not me. But then as she starts to sing stronger, she gets more confidence in who she is. What's amazing is as she gets more confidence, the people around her get more confidence. The people around them begin to like, yes, yes, and everyone comes in. So that, in other words, when we step in our true, authentic humility, it is not about us. It's really about the community, because we are encouraging the community to do the same. I'm going to step into my greatness, and you're going to step in your greatness, and we're not competing, because we're all moving for the greater glory of God, right? So there's one part where the second verse is coming on, and she turns around, she looks at the guy, and she's like, "You better sing," and he starts singing, and then there's a moment where she kind of like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing." She reaches out to Hugh Jackman, and he like says, "No, you're good." And then they start going, and at the very end, she's like, "This is me. Deal with it." I mean, it's beautiful. Really, if you have time, just say, "Greatest Showman, this is me," practice, and it'll come up. It is just a beautiful way of seeing her embrace. And that's what we need to do. That is authentic humility. Understanding who we are, loved sinners, but still loved, still gifted. God, I mean, and that's who God uses, by the way. God uses loved sinners. God puts gifts in the loved sinners, right? I mean, we know David, Moses. I mean, I can name a ton. It's the sinners who God uses, because we understand that our dependence is on God. It's not about us, it's on God. So love sinners, using our gifts, pointing towards where they come from, and inviting others to do the same. That's authentic humility. So my friend, Kevin O'Brien, another great Jesuit, talks about the three classes of humility that Ignatius mentions in the exercises. And again, we want to know that we're not saying that any of these are wrong. It just, again, is a way for us to reflect, where are we at the table? Where are we in this journey? So the one is, the first class is we express our love by doing our duty and following God's law. We know those people, check the box. And it's not, again, maybe that's all I can do at the moment. I'm following the law, and that's good. I want to be right. The second class says we honor God's law and we avoid sin, yes, but we also strive for indifference. I like to say in detachment, right? We cultivate an attitude of interior freedom. We talked a little bit about this earlier. So it's like a detachment. And then we move beyond following God's law. This is the third one, and making reasoned judgments with the idea that we are moving to imitate and be like Christ. So the difference, I say, like the second one is like, I'm detached. If this happens, great. If that doesn't happen, that's okay too. That's the second one. The third one is, what's going to get me as close as possible to be like Christ? That's going to cost me sometimes everything. So in other words, it's this, if you look at Luke chapter 9, right? If you're following me, you deny yourself. And we already talked about what that means. So you know what that means. It doesn't mean I denied the talents that I have, but it means that I know that I'm leaning totally dependent on God. I take up my cross. I take up the cross. So I look for the thing that the road that's less traveled, and I follow Christ. I like to say it this way. This is how it came to me when I was on my 30-day retreat. As much as I love whatever, I love Jesus more. And I that might sound like it's like an easy thing, but it could be as much as I love books, I love Jesus more. And you think, oh, Danielle, that's funny. That's silly. Well, it's silly until I know somebody asked to borrow a book. And sometimes I'm kind of like, maybe I'll buy you a book as opposed to lending it because I want to make sure I have it. Or as much as I love pens, I mean, so there's some silly stuff, but then as much as I love flattery, as much as I love being right, as much as I love knowing all the answers, as much as like that can go anywhere. I love Jesus more. So that my love for Jesus dictates how I move and breathe in the world. And sometimes the Lord takes me on a path where I will not be proven right for a long time. But I love Jesus more, so I have to trust. Can God trust me with trouble? Can Jesus trust that even though it's not as if it's not the way that makes me shine, that I will still be able to follow? And that's a question that I ask. I mean, you can do that every day, all the time, any little, for any little thing or big thing. So how do I play this out in my daily life and what I'm doing right now with the 3 degrees? So as it said, I do a lot of work with equity and inclusion. And I like to talk about allyship, because I think that's how we're going to change the world, the trajectory in terms of how we understand racial justice, especially. That when we talk about privilege and all that, I don't want to focus on you have it or you and I don't, or that's not what I want to know is, how are you using what God has given you to better the kingdom? How are you using what God has given you, whether that's talents or whatever, or privilege in a society that still wrestles with this? How are you using that to better the kingdom or to interrupt the pattern of injustice? So we have actors who kind of just watch, sideline. They say, well, I'm not a racist. I don't say anything. I'm not racist. I don't use bad word. I don't use words. But they're like observing, right? I follow the law. I do what I need to do. Good. Or you're an ally who's like, I'm going to get in there. I'm walking with. I am accompanying. I am. I might disrupt, but I'm gonna just. I want to be supportive. But then the accomplice says, oh, I'm not just going to stop there. I might start attacking the very things that are stopping. I'm not, in other words, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to look at areas that I'm going to start tearing down walls now. Now, to move from an ally to accomplice, it's going to cost you big. It's going to cost you friendships. It's going to cost, sometimes you're going to look silly. It's going to cost you maybe family relationships sometimes, dynamics. It's going to cost, but you are willing to do it because you know it's for the betterment of the kingdom. And you're not waiting, and it's not a savior. You're not saving. It's not a savior mentality, but that you see a moment, you're not waiting for permission to step in, but you're saying, this is wrong. And you're not looking around to see if someone's behind you to pat you on the back. Right? As an example, I would say my husband, who many of you know is white, right? And so we, and many of you might have heard the story before, but I just like to tell this story because I think it's a perfect example of watching Tim move these degrees of humility and an actor. So Tim, very much non-racist. And of course, I hope so because we are married. But when I would talk to him about the idea of people of color, my son, who's Black, driving, and what I had to tell my son, as opposed to how Tim talked to his children about driving, they were 16, completely different stories, completely different ways it was celebrated. Like, and Tim celebrated it. It was like big, hey, he got his license. Oh, awesome. Da, da, da. Ours was really kind of like let's sit down and talk about what this means and how we're going to move in the future. At one point, Tim said, I said to Tim, are you going to tell them about the police? And he said, oh, yeah. If something's wrong, just find a police officer. They'll help you out. I was like, oh my God, this is not. And again, it's a beautiful, I understand the need for police, but it was just a different narrative than what I did. So I explained that to Tim later. And he was like, wow, just as we, continue to be married, and he continued to observe things. About 4 years ago, we were driving down the highway. We passed by a car that was stopped, flat tire. 3 young African-American men were trying to weigh people down. Tim stops and he comes over and we ask, how can we help you change the tire? The tire they had to change the tire was flat. So we were like, okay, let's call AAA. So we called AAA. As we were waiting for AAA to come, a police officer shows up. We're in our car. The boys are in there. The boys are outside their car. Tim sees the police officer pull up without me saying anything. Tim gets out of the car, walks to the police officer, very friendly, stands in front of the young men and says, and kind of just, puts his hand back and he says, hi, officer, how are you doing today? What can I do for you? Officer was great. It was fine. But what I noticed was the body language of the boys. When Tim did that, it was kind of like, you could just see weight lifting off of them. Like it was a beautiful, if I had taken a picture, I wish I could have. And so Tim, spoke, and the officer was great, and everything happened. And at the end, we left, and the boy, I was like, boy, that they were hugging Tim. They were like, thank you so much. That's what I mean when I say you're stepping into an accomplice, right? The humility, the third class of humility, to say, how can I imitate Christ in this situation? So it's not just, oh, I want to make, I'm not just recording a video, or I'm not just sitting in the car watching, or I'm not just standing there not saying anything, but I am getting actively, and what would Jesus do? Jesus would have gotten in there and stood there. He would have entered in a conversation, because it's connection, not agreement, connection. He would have tried to find a way to connect, so that when we connect, it diffuses the tension. Think about it. Anytime there's like really frantic, and then we can connect on something, the tension diffuses. Community can begin to really be built. That's the purpose of those classes of humility, for us to really begin to build community. And so if we really start to focus on, not because the law tells me to do this, not because, I want to be, I want to be indifferent, but not more than even being indifferent. I want to be like Christ. I want to be actively choosing to imitate Christ. That's where we want to land on this. So I'll just show you my last slide, just so that people have an idea of where I got my stuff. So these were the resources that I used, besides just what I remember. Casey Beaumere wrote a book called A Purposeful Past. He talks about, that's kind of his, I think it was his pilgrimage as a novice, but he talks about the primary identities, secondary identities. He also has some videos online from the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Resources out of Boston College. So great. The Ignatian Adventure is a great book by Kevin O'Brien. And then this is an oldie but a goodie, Spiritual Freedom by John English. I just solid stuff about how to look at these things. Come in the house. Come in the house. Jesus, you are welcome. Come in this house. Let your glory fill this house. Let your glory fill this house. Jesus, you are welcome. Let your glory fill this house. Let your love fill this house. Let your love fill this house. Jesus, you are welcome. Let your love fill the house.